Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more Esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Mrs. Helena Blavatsky. This is the Secret Doctrine. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but people find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of the Secret Doctrine with Stanza 8, the evolution of animal mammalians, the first fall, and with some objections to it because this is a short section. 28. From the drops of sweat, A, from the residue of the substance, matter from dead bodies and animals of the wheel before, previous, third round, and from cast-off dust, the first animals of this round were produced. A. The occult doctrine maintains that, in this round, the mammalians were a later work of evolution than man. Evolution proceeds in cycles. I want to go ahead and say right now, straight off the top, I disagree with this, right? I made my arguments for it yesterday, but we have fossil records of mammals before we have fossil records of humans. And so this is on its face simply not true. And that doesn't mean that we can't find a fossil record of a human older than that, but we have not as of yet, and so we have to assume that we won't. Right? We have some 50,000 or 20,000, 30,000 years old. We have human remains, but we have mammalian remains that are significantly older than that. We have a mammal that was flash frozen in the Arctic that is older than that. The great manventeric cycle of 7 rounds, beginning in the first round with mineral, vegetable, and animal, brings its evolutionary work on the descending arc to a dead stop in the middle of the 4th race, and at the close of the first half of the 4th round. It is on our Earth, then, the 4th sphere and the lowest, and in the present round, that this middle point has been reached. And, since the monad has passed, after its first in metallization on globe A, through the mineral, vegetable, and animal worlds in every degree of the 3 states of matter, except the last degree of the 3rd or solid state, which is it reached only at the midpoint of evolution. It is but logical and natural that at the beginning of the 4th round on globe D, man should be the first to appear, and also that its frame should be of the most tenuous matter that is compatible with objectivity. To make it still clearer, if the monad begins its cycle of incarnations through the 3 objective kingdoms on the descending curved line, it has necessarily to enter on the reascending curved line of the sphere as a man also. That is just simply circular logic, right? On the descending arc, it is the spiritual which is gradually transformed into the material. On the middle line of the base, spirit and matter are equilibrized in man. On the ascending arc, spirit is slowly reasserting itself at the expense of the physical, or matter, so that, at the close of the 7th race of the 7th round, the monad will find itself as free from matter and all its qualities as it was in the beginning, having gained, in addition, the experience and wisdom, the fruition of all its personal lives, without their evil and temptations. This order of evolution is found also in Genesis, chapter 1 and 2, if one reads it in its true esoteric sense, for chapter 1 contains the history of the first 3 rounds, as well as that of the first 3 races of the 4th, up to that moment when man is called to conscious life by the Elohim of wisdom. In the first chapter, animals, whales, and fowls of the air are created before the androgyne man. Footnote. An allegorical reference to the sacred animals of the zodiac and other heavenly bodies, some Kabbalists see in them the prototypes of animals. You do not get to have it both ways, right? This is either an allegorical reference to the sacred animals of the zodiac, or it is an account that is written down. You don't get to have it both ways. Now, me personally, I don't believe that it's either. I think both of those are incorrect. But you don't get to say that it's an allegorical reference and in the same paragraph be trying to use that as justification for your beliefs. That is silly. In the second, Adam, the sexless, comes first, and the animals only appear after him. Even the state of mental torpor and unconsciousness of the first two races and of the first half of the third race is symbolized in the second chapter of Genesis by the deep sleep of Adam. It was the dreamless sleep of mental inaction, the slumber of the soul and mind, which was meant by that sleep, and not at all the physiological process of differentiation of sexes, as a learned French theorist, M. Nodin, imagined. The Puranas, the Chaldean and Egyptian fragments, and also the Chinese traditions, all show an agreement with the secret doctrine as to the process and order of evolution. And again, we will point out that she spent the entirety of the first book in this series and pretty much the entirety of Isis Unveiled talking about how the Puranas, Chaldean, and Egyptian fragments, as well as the Chinese, all use the same source material. And if they all are the same source material, in this case the Rig Veda, then of course they are going to correlate, right? Again, you don't get to have it both ways. Either the Chaldean and Egyptian fragments are independent and they correlate with what you already believe, or what you already believe is true, and therefore the correlation is absolutely necessary because it comes from the same source material. It's the same as trying to find fundamental doctrinal disbelief in Protestant, Methodist, and Baptist. Yes, they have different ways of enacting their faith, but the basic core tenet of the faith is the same. That is like finding a Methodist tract book and it's got Jesus in it, and you're like, well, that just proves that the Baptists are right because the Methodists are also using Jesus. It just doesn't work. You do not get to have it both ways. Back to the text. We find in them the corroboration of almost all of our teaching, because it is literally your teaching, right? And for instance, the statement concerning the oviparous mode of procreation of the third race, and even a hint at a less innocent mode of the procreation of the first mammal forms, gigantic, transparent, dumb, and monstrous they were, says the commentary. Study the stories of the several rishis and their multifarious progeny, e.g., Palastaya is the father of all the serpents and nagas. My first instinct in seeing this, I'm from Louisiana, y'all. I saw Pastalai and I'm like, abomination. Sorry. Side note. Okay, back to the text. The oviparous brood, Kasayapa, was grandsire, through his wife Tamra, of the birds and of Garuda, king of the feathered tribe, while his wife Surabi was the parent of cows and buffaloes, etc., etc. In the secret doctrine, the first Nagas, being wiser than serpents, are the sons of will and yoga, born before the complete separation of the sexes, matured in the man-bearing eggs. Footnote 2. In Hesiod, Zeus creates his third race of men out of ash trees. In the Popol Vuh, the third race of men is created out of the tree Tzita and the marrow of the reed called Sibak. But Sabak means egg in the mystery language of the Artufas, or initiation caves. In a report sent in 1812 to the Cortes by Don Baptista Pino, it is said, all the pueblos have their Artufas, so the natives call subterranean rooms with only a single door where they secretly assemble. These are impenetrable temples, and the doors are always closed to the Spaniards. They adore the sun and moon, fire, and the great snake, the creative power, whose eggs are called sabak. Okay, back to there. Man-bearing eggs produced by the power, Kritya Sakti, of the holy sages of the early third race. Footnote 3. There is a notable difference esoterically between the words Sarpa and Naga, though they are both used indiscriminately. Sarpa, serpent, is from the root srip, serpo, to creep, and they are called ahi, from ha, to abandon. The Sarpa was produced from Brahma's hair, which, owing to his fright at beholding the Yakshas, whom he had created horrible to behold, fell off from his head, each hair becoming a serpent. They are called Sarpa from their creeping, and ahi because they had deserted the head. Wilson. But the Nagas, their serpent tail notwithstanding, do not creep, but manage to walk, run, and fight in the allegories. Alright, so we are here. In these were incarnated the lords of the three upper worlds, the various classes of Rudras, who had been Tushitas, who had been Yahas, who are Adityas. For, as explained by Parasara, there are 100 appellations of the immeasurably mighty Rudras. Some of the descendants of the primitive Nagas, the serpents of wisdom, peopled America when its continent arose during the palmy days of the great Atlantis. That would be after the days of Atlantis, would be when it rose. And there are many reasons for that the 12,000-year disaster cycle will walk you through. America being the Patala, or antipodes, of Jambudvipa, not of Bharatavarsha. Otherwise, whence the traditions and legends, the latter always more true than history, as says Augustin Thierry, and even the identity and the names of certain medicine men and priests who exist to this day in Mexico. We shall have to say something of the Nargals and the Nagals, and also of Nagalism, called devil worship by the missionaries. In almost all the Puranas, the story of the sacrifice of Daksha is given, the oldest account of which is to be found in the Vayu Purana. Allegorical as it is, there is more meaning and biological revelation in it, to a naturalist, than all of the pseudo-scientific vagaries, which are regarded as learned theories and hypotheses. Daksha, who is regarded as the chief progenitor, is, moreover, pointed out as the creator of physical man in the fable, which makes him lose his head from his body in the general strife between the gods and the Romas. This head, being burnt in the fire, is replaced by the head of a ram, Kasikanda. Now the ram's head and horns are ever the symbol of generating power and of reproductive force, and are phallic. As we have shown, it is Daksha who establishes the era of men engendered by sexual intercourse. But this mode of procreation did not occur suddenly, as one may think, and required long ages before it became the one natural way. That is physically impossible. Therefore, and by that I mean, like macroevolution not fitting, because sometimes there are mutations that have to be before there can be, right? The valve in a giraffe's throat, aorta, that shuts off blood flow to his brain if it gets too low. By the time you need that, it's already too late. Your brain is already mush. It is too late to develop that evolutionary trait. It would be the exact same here. There is no transition period between an osmosis and a sexual reproduction. There can't be. You are going from one sexual reproduction into another. There cannot be an era of mingling between those, where you have sex with the reproducer of biophoresis. What is it called? Osmosis, right? You can't do that. There's no point at which those two different things are going to overlap. It has to go directly from the osmosis into sexual generation. There is no in-between there. Alright, so, therefore, his sacrifice to the gods is shown as interfered with by Siva, the destroying deity, evolution and progress personified, who is the regenerator at the same time, who destroys things under one form, but to recall them to life under another, more perfect type. Siva Rudra creates the terrible Virabhadra, born of his breath, the thousand-headed, thousand-armed, etc. monster, and commissions him to destroy the sacrifice prepared by Daksha. Then Virabhadra, abiding in the region of the ghosts, ethereal men, created from the pores of the skin, Roma Kupas, powerful Romas. Footnote. Where is it? There it is. Wilson translate the word as demigods. See his Vishnu Purana. But Ranas or Ramyas are simply a race, a tribe. Powerful Romas or Romayas. Now, however mythical the allegory, the Mahabharata, which is history as much as is the Iliad, which we are doing. We're in the middle of the Iliad, if you were unaware. That is in the Ancient Lore playlist. Shows, footnote, and 12. Okay, we just did 12. The Ramayas and other races as springing in the same manner from the Ramakapas, hair or skin poles. Okay, which is history as much as is the Iliad. So it's not saying that this is said in the Iliad, right? Because this is most definitely not said in the Iliad. This allegorical description of the sacrifice is full of significance to the students of the secret doctrine who know of the Sweatborn. In the Vayu Purana's account of Daksha's sacrifice, moreover, it is said to have taken place in the presence of creatures born from the egg, from the vapor, vegetation, pores of the skin, and finally, only from the womb. Daksha typifies the early third race, holy and pure, still devoid of an individual ego and having merely the passive capacities. Brahma, therefore, commands him to create in the esoteric texts. When obeying the command, he made inferior and superior, Avara and Vara, progeny, Putra, bipeds and quadrupeds, and by his will gave birth to females, and to the gods, the Daityas, giants of the fourth race, the snake gods, animals, cattle, and the Danavas, titans and demon magicians, and other beings. From that period forward, living creatures were engendered by sexual intercourse. By the time of the Daksha, they were variously propagated by the will, by sight, by touch, and by yoga power. Footnote 3. Footnote 3 is Vishnu Purana. And now comes the simply zoological teaching. 29. Animals with bones, dragons of the deep, and flying sarpas, serpents, were added to the creeping things. They that creep on the ground got wings. They of the long necks in the water became the progenitors of the fowls in the air. A. This is a point on which the teachings and modern biological speculation are in perfect accord. The missing links representing this transition process between reptile and bird are apparent to the veriest bigot, especially in the Ornithoscalidae, Hesperornis, and Archaeopteryx evoked. And again, I don't believe that macroevolution is a thing, right? The change of one species into another, except through intervention of some type. It can be an alien came down. That can happen. It can be an electromagnetic disturbance in the cosmos. That can happen. But to just simply, through time and natural selection, go from a fish to a bird, I do not at all believe happen. For a variety of reasons, not the least of which is that missing gap, right? You're not going to have sex with an ape if you're not an ape. That's just simply not going to happen. And so there's no overlap time period in which it is possible that that could have been. 30. During the third race, the boneless animals grew and changed. They became animals with bones. Their cacayas became solid also. 31. The animals separated the first into mate and female. And I'm assuming that's supposed to be male and not mate. A. Vertebrates. And after that, mammalians. Before that, the animals were also ethereal proto-organisms, just as man was. There were vertebrates, right? snakes have vertebrae. It's wild the leaps that you will go to prove the things that you want to believe. B, the fact of, and so do chickens, so do sparrows, right? They all have vertebrae. All of them. They have a spinal cord. Fish have vertebrae. The fact of former hermaphrodite animals and the subsequent separation of the sexes is now indisputable, even from the standpoint of biology. That is patently untrue. As Professor Oscar Schmidt, an avowed Darwinist, shows, use and disuse combined with selection elucidate the separation of the sexes and the existence, totally incomprehensible, of rudimentary sex organs. In the vertebrata especially, each sex possesses such distinct traces of the reproductive apparatus characteristic of the other, that even antiquity assumed hermaphroditism as a natural, primeval form of mankind. The tenacity with which the rudiments of sexual organs are inherited is remarkable. In the class of animals, actual hermaphroditism is unheard of, although through the whole period of their development they drag along with them these residues borne by their unknown ancestry. No one can say how long ago, because there is no reason to believe that that is true. In order to make the theory work, then they make the assumptions that it does. But, use and disuse combined with selection elucidate the separation of the sexes. There is no biological imperative that would take you from hermaphrodite into dual-sexed, right? It is much easier for the propagation of the species if you do not have to find a mate of appropriate natural selection, right? That is easier by a long shot. Most married people do that anyway. And so this on its face doesn't make sense, right? There is no biological imperative to go from having a single sex, which propagates the species with no problem, to one that has to take two, and then you have the natural selection process, which has some problems attached to it. And so that, on a biological standpoint, is not going to work. Add to that the argument already made that if there was a random natural selection by which this gorilla was born without hair, right? This is a male gorilla, otherwise perfectly normal, perfectly fine, but completely without hair. That gorilla is not going to be selected by the females to reproduce, and so its genes are not going to carry on. Again, the biological imperative is not there. That gorilla is less prepared to survive. Any progeny from that gorilla is going to be less likely to survive. And so the natural selection process is not going to allow that to happen. This interspecies just doesn't work for a variety of reasons, even if you really, really wanted to. Now, if we find a missing link at some point where we find that a human was a hermaphrodite and reproduced with themselves, which is a whole wild-ass theory, then I will be corrected, right? I will come and I will make just as public of a statement as I am making now when I say that it doesn't work. But I don't think we're going to find that missing link. I just don't. Now, I don't believe that it was an alien that came down and meddled with the DNA. I believe that it was a radioactive emanation from the sun, passed really close to the Earth, and it caused spontaneous mutations within species into other species, activated DNA in different ways. That is entirely possible. The random natural selection through time from one species to another really isn't. 31. They, the animals, began to breed. The twofold man then separated also. He, man, said, let us unite and make creatures. They did. 32. And those which had no spark, the narrow-brained, footnote. Is that footnote? That's footnote 2. See verse 24. We missed this one, Doctrine of Darwinism, but it's just a reference. It'll be all right. Now, My theory on this particular phrase, right, the narrow-brained, have you seen the elongated skulls from Peru? Right. That, to me, fits with the narrow brain. It's entirely possible that it means something else. And then again, this is not something I am firm upon, but that makes sense, right? And those which had no spock, the narrow-brained, took huge she-animals unto them. They begat upon them dumb races. Dumb they were, the narrow-brained, themselves. But their tongues, untied, the tongues of their progeny remained still. Monsters they bred, a race of crooked, red hair-covered monsters, going on all fours. Footnote 3. These animals, or monsters, are not the anthropoid or any other apes, but verily what the anthropologist might call the missing link, the primitive lower man. See infra. A dumb race, to keep the shame untold. Footnote 4. The shame of their animal origin, which our modern scientists would emphasize if they could. A. The animals, separated the first, says stanza 31, bear in mind that at that period men were different, even physiologically, from what they are now, having passed the middle point of the fifth race. We are not told what the huge she-animals were, but certainly were as different from any we know now as were the men. And again, my whole argument still stands, the interspecies breeding. This was the first physical fall into matter of some of the then existing and lower races. Bear in mind, stanza 24, the sons of wisdom had spurned the early third race, in example, the non-developed, and are shown incarnating in and thereby endowing with intellect the later third race. Thus, the sin of the brainless or mindless races who had no spark and were irresponsible fell upon those who failed to do by them their karmic duty. B. See later on concerning the beginning of human speech. All right, now this is the beginning of the second section. What may be the objections to the foregoing? Thus, occultism rejects the idea that nature developed man from the ape, or even from an ancestor common to both, but traces, on the contrary, some of the most anthropoid species to the third race of man of the early Atlantean periods. As this proposition will be maintained and defended elsewhere, a few words more are all that is needed at present. For greater clearness, however, we shall repeat in brief what was said previously in Book 1, stanza 6. Our teachings show that, while it is quite correct to say that nature had built, at one time, around the human astral form an ape-like external shape, yet it is as correct that this shape was no more than that of the missing link, than were the coverings of that astral form during the course of its natural evolution through all the kingdoms of nature. Nor was it, as shown in the proper place on this fourth round planet, that such evolution took place, but only during the first, second, and third rounds, when man was, in turn, a stone, a plant, and an animal, until he became what he was in the first root race of present humanity. The real line of evolution differs from the Darwinian, and the two systems are irreconcilable, except when the latter is divorced from the dogma of natural selection and the like. Indeed, between the Monera of Haeckel and the Sarasoripa of Manu, there lies an impassable chasm in the shape of the Jiva. For the human monad, whether metallized in the stone atom, or vegetalized in the plant, or animalized in the animal, is still and ever a divine, hence also a human monad. It ceases to be human only when it becomes absolutely divine. The terms mineral, vegetable, and animal monad are meant to create a superficial distinction. There is no such thing as a monad, Yiva, other than divine, and consequently having been or having to become human. And the latter term has to remain meaningless unless the difference is well understood. The monad is a drop out of the shoreless ocean beyond, or, to be correct, within the plane of primeval differentiation. It is divine in its higher and human in its lower condition, the adjectives higher and lower being used for lack of better words. In a monad, it remains at all times, save in the nirvanic state, under whatever conditions or whatever external forms, as the Logos reflects the universe in the divine mind, and the manifested universe reflects itself in each of its monads, as Leibniz put it, repeated in Eastern teaching. So the monad has, during the cycle of its incarnations, to reflect in itself every root form of each kingdom. Therefore, the Kabbalists say correctly that man becomes a stone, a plant, an animal, a man, a spirit, and finally God, thus accomplishing his cycle or circuit, returning to the point from which he started as heavenly man. All right, now, I hold different, right? The theory of spiritual evolution goes as such. 0 is the source. 1 is the individualized elemental atom. Oxygen, hydrogen, helium, nitrogen, each in its own state, doing its own thing. The second plane of existence is going to be plants. They grow up. They can't move that way. Next is going to be the untrainable animals, the ones that operate merely on instinct. They can go up and they can go that way, but they don't have any real understanding of time or anticipation. Fourth is going to be the trainable animals, dogs, horses, things along that nature. They have a better instinct. They can anticipate, right? They can understand that at this time I am going to be fed. At this time we are going to take a walk. At this time they anticipate. Fifth is going to be us. We have the ability to anticipate and plan because we have mastery of time. Well, not mastery. Mastery is kind of the wrong word. We have a better navigation of time. The sixth state is going to be the elementals, the salamanders and nymphs, the disincorporated spirits of humans, right? The ones who fail to pass on as they are intended to do. The seventh is going to be the level of intervention. That is going to be the angels, the demons, the jinn, the angels, whatever you want to call them. And then the eighth is not you becoming a god. It is returning to source. When from 0 and 8 are all things drawn and returned. And so for me, this is not correct. For me, it's going to be a little bit different. Back to the text. But by man, the divine monad is meant, and not the thinking entity, much less his physical body. While rejecting the immortal soul, the men of science now try to trace the latter through a series of animal forms, from the lowest to the highest. Whereas, in truth, all the present fauna are the descendants of these primordial monsters of which the stanzas speak. The animals, the creeping beast, and those in the waters that preceded man in this fourth round, as well as those contemporary with the third race, and again, the mammalia that are posterior to the third and fourth races, are all either directly or indirectly the mutual and correlative product, physically, of man. It is correct to say that the man of this Manvantara, in example, during the 3 preceding rounds, has passed through all the kingdoms of nature. That he was a stone, a plant, an animal, but these stones, plants, and animals were the prototypes, the filmy presentiments of those of the fourth round, and B, even those at the beginning of the fourth round, were the astral shadows of the present, as the occultists express it. And finally, the forms and genera of neither man, animal, nor plant were what they became later. Thus, the astral prototypes of the lower beings of the animal kingdom of the fourth round, which preceded the Kakayas of men, were the consolidated, though still very ethereal, sheaths of the still more ethereal forms or models produced at the close of the third round on Globe D. Footnote. Vide Esoteric Buddhism. Produced from the residue of the substance matter from dead bodies of men and other extinct animals of the wheel before, or the previous third round, as stanza 24 tells us. Hence, the nondescript animals that preceded the astral man at the beginning of this life cycle on our earth were still, so to speak, the progeny of the man of the third round. The mammalians of this round owe their existence, in a great measure, to man again. Moreover, the ancestor of the present anthropoid animal, the ape, is the direct production of the yet mindless man, who desecrated his human dignity by putting himself physically on the level of an animal. There's a lot there, right? You're assuming here that man is better than animal. And while it is a natural thing to assume for yourself, that doesn't make it necessarily true, right? This human dignity is a relative term. There are people who are definitely less dignified than animals. Okay? And so, relative terms, they're whatever. This is something that can be, but is not necessarily, right? Some people have more dignity than animals, some don't. If you go to India, they just poop wherever they want to. Out in the middle of the street, they just pop a squat and go. That is just normal culture for them. That is not human dignity, right? At least not according to the values that we hold here in the States. That is true in many other countries as well. Like, there are places where if you shake somebody's hand with the wrong hand, there's a reason why they will want to kill you, right? That is not human dignity. That is not something that is intrinsically better than animals. This is something that you are assuming in order to make your doctrine a little bit more palatable to people. There is no reason to think that we are, in any way, shape, or form, better than animals, doing exactly what they were created to do. We're the only ones that really have a conflict when it comes to doing the right thing on a regular basis. And so this human dignity being desecrated, that's a stretch for me already. And I don't believe in this particular thing. So, footnote, or back to the text. The above accounts for some of the alleged physiological proofs brought forward by the anthropologist as a demonstration of the descent of man from the animals. The point most insisted upon by the evolutionists is that the history of the embryo is an epitome of the race, that every organism in its development from the egg runs through a series of forms, through which, in like succession, its ancestors have passed in the long course of Earth history. Footnote. A very strong argument in favor of variability is supplied by the science of embryology. Is not man in uterus a simple cell, a vegetable with 3 or 4 leaflets, a tadpole with bronchi, a mammal with a tail, lastly, a primate and a biped? It is scarcely possible not to recognize in the embryonic evolution a rapid sketch, a faithful summary of the entire organic series. Do you do indeed contain the entirety of what you will become? Right, that's what I'm assuming this is. The summary alluded to is, however, only that of the store of types hoarded up in man, the microcosm. This simple explanation meets all such objections as the presence of the rudimentary tail in the fetus, a fact triumphantly paraded by Haeckel and Darwin as conclusively in favor of the ape ancestor theory. It may also be pointed out that the presence of a vegetable with leaflets in the embryonic stages is not explained on ordinary evolutionist principles. That is because I'm not understanding what is being stated here, right? Are they trying to say that there is the presence of a vegetable in a human embryo? If so, that is entirely patently untrue. Or are they saying that in a plant embryo they have the prototype of a leaflet? And that is true, Although, as far as I am aware, there is not a fully developed leaf inside of any of the seeds at the beginning, right? They develop a leaf, but I don't think any of them have one to begin with, despite the fact that that was stated many times for the lotus in the other study, right? I grew a lotus and it did not come out with a leaf. That is simply true. And so I'm not sure what is exactly being stated here. Is it trying to say that the ape ancestor and the human have a leaf inside of there? Maybe you can make that extrapolation due to not having knowledge by observing the splitting of the cell and becoming, right? It's like in the beginning, there is a cell, an egg, that gets fertilized, right? The two combine, there's a flash of light, the DNA is together, and it starts duplicating itself through osmosis. At that point, at one point when it has 4 different sections, then you could extrapolate that possibly that is a plant with leaves. But other than that, I do not understand where that is coming from at all, if this is talking about from humans. Darwinists have not traced man through the vegetable, but occultists have. That's because there is no reason or belief or anything at all to assume that that would be a possibility, right? The DNA is completely different. Like, we share a lot of DNA with several different animals. We share considerably less with any plants. Why then this feature in the embryo? Okay, so they are trying to say that at some point that is stupid. Right? I understand that we have the lens of history to look back upon. We have advances in technology. We have a greater understanding of embryology. I don't understand how at any point in time you could assume that that was a vegetable. Like, that's just trying to make some shit fit. That's all that is. A simple cell, a vegetable with 3 or 4 leaflets, a tadpole with branchiae, a mammal with a tail, and lastly a primate. You're trying to say that this is all. It's not. You're wrong. All right. What footnote was that? Was that footnote 1? Yes, okay. Earth's history. The history of the embryo is a picture in little, an outline of that race. This conception forms the gist of our fundamental biogenetic law, which we are obliged to place at the head of the study of the fundamental law of organic development. Footnote 2. The Proofs of Evolution, a lecture by Haeckel. This modern theory was known as a fact to, and far more philosophically expressed by, the sages and occultists from the remotest ages. A passage from Isis Unveiled, which we have done in its entirety, may here be cited to furnish a few points of comparison. In Volume 1, pages 338 or 388 to 89, it was asked why, with all their great learning, physiologists were unable to explain teratological phenomena. Any anatomist who has made the development and growth of the embryo a subject of special study can tell, without much brain work, what daily experience and the evidence of his own eyes show him, vis-a-vis, that up to a certain period, the human embryo is facsimile of a young batrachian in its first remove from the spawn, tadpole. But no physiologist or anatomist seems to have had the idea of applying to the development of the human being, from the first instant of its physical appearance as a germ to its ultimate formation in birth, the Pythagorean esoteric doctrine of metempsychosis, so erroneously interpreted by critics, the meaning of the axiom, a stone becomes a plant a beast a man, etc., was mentioned in another place in relation to the spiritual and physical evolution of men on this earth. We will now add a few more words to make the matter clearer. What is the primitive shape of the future man? A grain, a corpuscle. Some say physiologists. A molecule, an ovum of the ovum, says others. If it could be analyzed by the microscope or otherwise, of what ought we to expect to find it composed? Analogically, we should say, of a nucleus of inorganic matter, wrong, deposited from the circulation at the germinating point, and united with a deposit of organic matter, wrong. It is all organic matter that is involved. In other words, this infinitesimal nucleus of the future man is composed of the same elements as a stone. That is true, but so are you. Of the same elements as the earth. Again, still true for you, right? Every single element that exists in the wild exists inside of you. That is a true thing, which the man is destined to inhabit it. Moses is cited by the Kabbalist as authority for the remark that it required earth and water to make a living being, and thus it may be said that man first appears as a stone. It is important to note that none of the books that are attributed to Moses were probably written by Moses. And if that is confusing, the unconventional Bible study. At the end of 3 or 4 weeks, the ovum has assumed a plant-like appearance, one extremity having become spheroidal and the other tapering like a carrot. Upon dissection, it is found to be composed, like an onion, of very delicate laminae or coats, enclosing a liquid. The laminae approach each other at the lower end, and the embryo hangs from the root of the umbilicus, almost like a fruit from the bough. The stone has now become changed by metempsychosis into a plant. You can say that it looks like a plant, you cannot say that it is a plant. I don't care if it's allegory. I don't care that it is a story. If you are saying that it changed into a plant, you are misleading stupid people. Then the embryonic creature begins to shoot out from the inside outwards. Its limbs develops its features. The eyes are visible as 2 black dots. The ears, nose, and mouth form depressions like the points of a pineapple before they begin to project. The embryo develops into an animal-like fetus, the shape of a tadpole, and, like an amphibious reptile, lives in water and develops from it. It is not pure water. Its monad has not yet become either human or immortal, for the Kabbalists tell us that this occurs only at the 4th hour. Wrong. One by one, the fetus assumes the characteristics of the human being. The first flutter of the immortal breath passes through its being. It moves, and the divine essence settles in the infant frame, which it will inhabit until the moment of its physical death, when man becomes a spirit. Now, I'm not sure exactly when this 4th hour is, but it sounds like they are talking about birth, because the first flutter of its immortal breath does not happen when it is still inside the womb. It is a human before it's born. Right? It is not at the point of delivery in which insolation takes place. It is at the moment of conception, when the flash of light of the 2 DNAs combining brings forth the logos, which is the creative element. We have dealt with that several times in somewhat extensive detail. Back to the text. This mysterious process of 9 months formation, the Kabbalists call the completion of the individual cycle of evolution. If it was, indeed, the completion of the individual cycle of evolution, then what would be born? Would it be a human? Would that be the completion of the cycle of evolution, according to your theory? No, it would be the spirit. As the fetus develops amidst the liquor amni, the amniotic fluid, in the womb, so the earths germinate in the universal ether, or astral fluid, in the womb of the universe. These cosmic children, like their pygmy inhabitants, are at first nuclei, then ovules, then gradually mature, and, becoming mother, in their turn, develop mineral, vegetable, animal, and human forms. Minerals are quite literally the amniotic fluid of the universe. So they're not developing them, they are refining them at best. From center to circumference, from the imperceptible vesicule to the uttermost conceivable bounds of the cosmos, those glorious thinkers, the occultists, trace cycle merging into cycle, containing and contained in an endless series. The embryo evolving in its prenatal sphere, the individual and his family, the family and the state in mankind, the earth and our system, that system in its central universe, the universe in the cosmos, and the cosmos in the one cause. Thus runs their philosophy of evolution, differing, as we see, from that of Haeckel. All are but parts of one stupendous whole, whose body nature is, and Parabrahm the soul. These are the proofs of occultism, and they are rejected by science. What proofs? There's no proofs there. But how is the chasm between the mind of man and animal to be bridged in this case? How, if the anthropoid and the Homo primigenius had, argumenti gratia, a common ancestor, in the way modern speculation puts it, did the groups diverge so widely from one another as regards mental capacity, spontaneous mutation due to electromagnetic interference? True, the occultist may be told that in every case occultism does what science repeats. It gives a common ancestor to ape and man, since it makes the former issue from primeval man. Aye, but that primeval man was man only in external form. He was mindless and soulless at the time he begot, with a female animal monster, the forefather of a series of apes. This speculation, if speculation it be, is at least logical, and fills the chasm between the mind of man and animal. Thus it accounts for and explains the hitherto unaccountable and inexplicable. My theory does it better. The fact that, in the present stage of evolution, science is almost certain that no issue can follow from the union of man and animal, is considered and explained elsewhere. There is a notable exception to that, which we have talked about before. Right, but it is true, right? You cannot go and choose a gorilla or any of the simians and mate with it and have progeny. That is not something that can happen. The only animal that I am aware that can happen with is a sheep. Now, it is funny how people are called sheep in a certain book, huh? Now, what is the fundamental difference between the accepted, or nearly so, conclusions as enunciated in the pedigree of man, vis-a-vis that man and ape have a common ancestor, and the teachings of occultism, which deny this conclusion and accept the fact that all things, and all living beings, have originated from one common source? Materialistic science makes man evolve gradually to what he is now, and starting from the first protoplasmic speck, called monoron, which, we are told, has, like the rest, originated in the course of immeasurable ages from a few, or from one simple, spontaneously arising original form that has obeyed one law of evolution, passed through unknown and unknowable types up to the ape, and thence to the human being. Where the transitional shapes are discoverable, we are not told, for the simple reason that no missing links between man and the apes have ever yet been found, though this fact in no way prevents men like Haeckel from inventing them ad libitum. It is important to note that there is still no missing links that have been found. We are 150 years later in science. We can look at the elemental, the elements in specificity, right? We can pull out a single hydrogen and look at it. We can look at a single helium and see the actual nucleus and the electrons. That is something we can do. We still don't have the missing link. Right, we have done excavations across most of the globe, not all of it by a long shot, but a good portion. Right? Places where we suspect that there might be something to learn, and we have not found a missing link in any of them. It is important to note that. Back to the text. Nor will they ever be met with, simply, again, because that link which unites man with his real ancestry is searched for on the objective plane and in the material world of forms, whereas it is safely hidden from the microscope and dissecting knife within the animal tabernacle of man himself. We repeat what we have said in Isis Unveiled. All things had their origin in spirit, evolution having originally begun from above and proceeded downwards instead of the reverse, as taught in the Darwinian theory. In other words, there has been a gradual materialization of forms until a fixed ultimate of debasement is reached. The point is that at which the doctrine of modern evolution enters into the arena of speculative hypotheses. Arrived at this period, we will find it easier to understand Haeckel's anthropogeny, which traces the pedigree of man from its protoplasmic root, sodden in the mud of seas, which existed before the oldest of the fossiloriferous rocks were deposited, according to Professor Huxley's exposition. We may believe the man of the third round evolved by gradual modification of an astral mammal of ape-like organization. Still easier when we remember that, though in a more condensed and less elegant, but still as comprehensible phraseology, the same theory was said by Berosus to have been taught many thousands of years before his time by the madfish Oan, or Dagon, the semi-demon of Babylonia. Footnote, though on somewhat modified lines. Corey, Ancient Fragments. But what lies back in the Darwinian line of descent? So far as he is concerned, nothing but unverifiable hypotheses. For, as he puts it, he views all beings as the lineal descendants of some few beings which lived long before the first bed of the Silurian system was deposited. Footnote 2. Origin of the species. He does not attempt to show us who these few beings were, but it answers our purpose quite as well, for, in the admission of their existence at all, resort to the ancients for corroboration and elaboration of the idea receives the stamp of scientific approbation. Truly, as also said in our first work, if we accept Darwin's theory of the development of species, we find that his starting point is placed in front of an open door. We are at liberty with him to either remain or cross the threshold, beyond which lies the limitless and incomprehensible, or rather the unutterable. If our mortal language is inadequate to express what our spirit dimly foresees in the great beyond, while on this earth it must realize it at some point in the timeless eternity. But what lies beyond Haeckel's theory? Why, Bathy Abyss, Haeckel, and no more. A further answer is given in Part 3, Addenda. And that is going to bring us to the end of these two sections. Evolution of the animal mammalians, the first. What may be objections to the foregoing, the second. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult topic. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs and that I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something I apologize for. The things that I pointed out I feel like are important to point out. Will we ever know the answer? Who knows? Probably not. I believe that the spontaneous mutation due to electromagnetic interference is probably the best answer for what happened. It is entirely possible that there was some species that had advanced knowledge, came down and fiddled with the DNA. That is possible, much more possible than the natural selection process as outlined by Darwin for the transition between species. Is there transition within the species? Absolutely. People differentiate for a variety of reasons. That doesn't mean that Darwin is entirely correct, right? Birds can adapt to different food. There are biological imperatives for that. There is no biological imperative for changing from one species into an entirely different one, right? There is no biological imperative for a fish to ever leave the water, right? We do have that today, right? There are fish that leave the water and go to different water. But on the main, there is no biological imperative for that. Everything that a fish needs is contained in the ocean, right? Not even taking into account freshwater fish where it may dry up and then they have a biological imperative to find another puddle. There's no reason for a sturgeon to do what it does, right? We have probably only one exception to the possibility of the interspecies thing, and that's the eel. Like, if you're unaware, recent research has discovered that eels all return to the same place to mate, that they change their shape and form through a pupae stage, and then they go off as an eel to explore, and then they come back to the Sargasso Sea and they propagate. That's really the only good transitionary, right there. You can make the argument for amphibians, like the tadpole process for a frog, but there is nothing even remotely close to any of that for a human being, right? We don't have a transitionary period at all in the fossil record, like at all. We don't have, still today, any species transforming into another species. We do not have any evidence of any of that happening whatsoever. And so there's good reasons not to believe that. The only exception to that being around the places that have seen nuclear disasters, right? Chernobyl is a good one. It is recent. They have discovered spontaneous genetic mutations within the wolf population near Chernobyl. That is a much better explanation on how it is possible for the spontaneous genetic mutation that would change a primate into a sapien. Now, I don't believe that there was a nuclear power plant on the Earth. I believe that it was a sun, that it was the sun that did it. There was an electromagnetic emanation from the sun which afforded the change. Now, in some ways, you can make the argument that that theory fits with Mrs. Blavatsky's, but I don't. I hold that it is different. I don't believe that there was an astral man sitting outside of these primates waiting for this change to happen so that they could take possession of the body. I just don't believe that. But hopefully, I have explained, at least, the reasons why I don't as we went along. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow, throw me a comment if you agree or disagree with anything that was stated today. Put it in the box below, and if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If there is another work you would like to see me discuss in the manner that we are doing here, drop that in the comments as well. And if you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks or even the membership. It will be greatly appreciated. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Take. Peace.